I'm Matthew Dank, and this is Service and Beyond podcast, where we talk to Australian military veterans about their service stories and their journeys out of uniform and back to civilian life. Welcome back to Service and Beyond and this special Remembrance Day edition. On 11 November 1918, the fighting drew to an end after 4 years of continuous warfare. With their armies retreating and close to collapse, German leaders signed an armistice, bringing to an end the First World War. After World War II, the Australian government agreed to the United Kingdom's proposal that Armistice Day be renamed Remembrance Day to commemorate those who were killed in both World Wars. Today, 70 years on, we pause and recognise all those who've given their life for this nation through conflict. We also turn our thoughts and gratitude to those carrying the burden of physical and mental injuries from their service, and importantly to our families who have contributed greatly, but who have not had the privilege of wearing the uniform in service themselves. Today also marks the first Remembrance Day since the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide commenced. Nearly 12 months ago, the first ceremonial hearing was held in Brisbane, and now with 7 hearings having been conducted around the country, and with an interim report released in August, the Commission continues with its final report due for release in June next year. This brings both the public spotlight and the opportunity for lasting change to how we care for the welfare of former serving personnel and their families. In 2022, I think it's also important that we recognise the present and growing demands on today's service personnel. Today's an occasion not only to look back, but to look forward to the sacrifices of current and future servicemen and women, and to recognise and honour their contribution to our Australia, our values, and our accepting society. Although we know no other way of life, what we have we must not take for granted. So in today's episode, it's my pleasure to bring you my special guest, Pete Rudland. After a decorated 28-year defence career, and after surviving a 2010 Blackhawk helicopter crash while deployed in Afghanistan, Pete shaped his transition from service and built a new career around assisting other veterans through counselling, coaching, and leadership through example. Pete is a National Ambassador for RSL Australia and has been closely supporting the ongoing Royal Commission hearings, and he joins me today for this in-depth conversation about his life and career. This episode was recorded in August 2022. Please enjoy. First up, it's really good to have you up here. It's been a while in the making, but I'm really glad for the opportunity to chat to you with a really extensive Army career, 28 years, both regulars and both aspects of the Special Forces, and you're one of the guys, and there's not many that I've come across who were about community service and assisting those with difficult mental and adjustment issues as you left Army. That was a focus for you, and it still is.
Firstly, great to be here. Appreciate the invitation. And I suppose, as far as my defence career has gone, 28 years, and I've always seen it to be very, very lucky, extremely lucky to have this job for so long. When it ended, I was very disappointed, but the opportunities present itself for me to stay in this environment and help people with either my service knowledge or my after-service knowledge and that separation knowledge. So I've been really gifted to be in the space for so long and to continue to be.
Mm-hmm. And we were talking yesterday about your origin story and your background, and that has clearly a big part to play in the man you are and some of the decisions you've made about how to dedicate yourself on the way out of service. So tell me about your upbringing back in WA.
The old upbringing one. Where do you always start with this one? It's such a unique one.
Yeah.
I suppose. So my story is, as far as where I come from, a lot of people seem to think it's quite a negative story, and there's a degree of sadness to it. Where I see it the other way, I was very fortunate for so many reasons as a kid. So basically, my mother was a 16-year-old girl and I was her second child. She'd had one at 14. Different fathers to both the kids. My natural father was going to jail for robbery, and he couldn't have us. So we were both put up for adoption, and I was adopted by my grandmother on my father's side. Her husband had died. He was a World War II veteran who had shrapnel wounds to his head, and over the period of 30 plus years, that those wounds caused a tumour and eventually killed him. I was really lucky. I got to grow up in Northam in Western Australia, and then went to the city to go to school. So I did all my schooling in the city. I picked up a bit of a scholarship at Perth Modern School for doing sport, and went to basically one of the best schools in WA, and just got to do sport all the time until I was old enough to join the army.
So funny that. What was sport to you? You know, you'd have trying in a somewhat unique upbringing there, family-wise, and sport sounds like it's a physical thing that really is something you could have thrown yourself into back then. Sport
was definitely something I threw myself into. I'm not that bright academically. I've never really been in that space where I was great. I think, when I became an adult, I applied myself at school and went back to school and got the necessary qualifications to go on with life after the defence. But, as a kid, all I wanted to do was play sport. I was so competitive. Everybody around me was competitive. Sport was just the thing to do. And being a West Australian kid, to play Aussie rules was the thing. And you're always looking to see how you could pick up a contract in that environment. I had two cousins who played, top-level AFL. One had a gifted career and went on to Geelong from Swan Districts in WA, and then went to Geelong. Played for many, many years and was a legend of the game. Another cousin, Peter Satori, played for Swan Districts and then went across, played for Essendon and Carlton. And watching, the careers as a young guy of those guys moving forward, Peter always had injuries, continually had injuries, hamstring, back, everything like that. And it hampered his career tremendously. And it made me think, that realism of, what's going to happen if I devote all of my life to playing sport and then I go and have injuries and I'm 23 years old, what do I have after it? So that sort of changed and shaped the way that I wanted to do things. I always knew that I wanted to go into defence, but I wanted to stay in the sports side of things. And defence were kind enough to let me play football for them for a long time as well. So
yeah, one of the many perks, hey, especially for the younger guys and girls. I remember, joining up, and I went through the Defence Academy, but the physical element, the training. I was a big rugby league player at school. It carried straight across. I just loved that element. And, I went at flying afterwards, but I think for the guys and girls who serve in more physical roles, such as yourself in infantry and then in special forces, I mean, that's a direct linkage, a direct correlation to that physical aspect. What was that like for you going from, some pretty extreme sports when you're growing up and at school into army?
The transition, I suppose, was pretty good because, you have that competitiveness. I'd always been that little dude who used to love to hit people anyway in sport. I think if I'd grown up in a state that had rugby, that would have been perfect for me.
Big hits.
But the style Aussie rules I played was always about, going pretty hard and hitting as many people as I could. So that part, it seemed a sort of a natural progression in the sport. And I was never ever the fastest runner, but I was always that dude who just, could put a pack on my back and walk forever. So I suppose that sporting environment gives you that mindset just to get on with it. There's an end state. So
yeah,
I think it transitions really well one into the other.
And you started off in a different era totally in defence, 10 years before my time, which was 1989 at the School of Infantry. That was a different army, a different defence force back then.
Yes and no. I think it was probably very much a defence force in transition. The Vietnam era had a certain, change in the progression of our defence force, and then after Vietnam, all of those lessons that were learnt were being forgotten. I suppose that we've relearnt now, with modern conflict. But again, understanding where the defence was and what those capabilities had to meet. So. In that sense, when you think of it like that, that's what we're doing exactly now. We've come out of Afghanistan and we're learning about what our defence, what's our threat, what's our capabilities and what we have to do. So it's similar. It's a building phase, just a little bit different, just without the technologies. So it was a good time to be in defence. It was a good time to learn and perfect your craft for whatever comes next.
And you did some time in Cambodia early in your career within the first 4 or 5 years, and then headed off to SAS selection in 1994.
The Cambodia trip was probably one of the best trips, and I was so lucky to pick that one up. So as a young guy in 3RAR, we didn't get an invitation as a unit really to send people. I was over doing a SIG course at 5-7, and out of that, there was an invitation sort of put out there for 7 guys to go on the trip. And I didn't get to go on the trip because I was, the world's best soldier or any of that sort of bollocks. I think the RSM liked me because I played Aussie rules football, and he remembered my name enough to say, how about this guy? Another one of my great friends, Dominic Redmond, he got to go on that trip, and he was, great at rugby. So there was a mixed bag of the guys who went on the trip. The section commander of the Duke of Gloucester Cup team, for example, went. So there was, great soldiers, and there was us guys who went for 40. But for that trip for learning something, here I was a young digger, got over to Cambodia, went out to Pravang province. The sergeant out there was a guy called Mick Kafour, who was a SIG from SASR, who treated us like adults. There was none of that sort of, in the battalion, where you've got to be hand walked everywhere, He was like, okay, Pete, you're going to go out to a single man det, you're going to work with a whole bunch of UNMOs, so United Nations military observers, and you'll facilitate all the communication stuff out from there. So, the autonomy was amazing. You were the only person in location with a weapon, and you got to make decisions. And I had a lieutenant colonel out there, British lieutenant colonel, I had Chinese lieutenant colonel, majors, captains, French, Cameroon, everything, Malay. So for really getting a feel and an understanding for other people and getting that professional maturity, that trip was amazing. And then on the other side of it, if you wanted to go out and party, you could really do that too. Being out on the Vietnamese border, and again, having that autonomy, it was just an amazing trip to learn so much from. And then, I was lucky enough to come straight back from that trip and then went straight onto my SAS selection course. I was actually panelled for the selection course for 93, and then I got told that I'd been selected to go to Cambodia. So I said to the RSM, what should I do? And he said, well, ring training squadron at SASR, and I did, and I spoke to a sergeant there, told him the situation I was in, and he goes, go to Cambodia, get that experience. We'll put you on the next course. And luckily, when I was in Cambodia, my SSM was a guy called John Rankin. And I told John, if we were home in time, would there be that opportunity of doing it? And he goes, oh, well, I'll make sure there is, mate. You show us you got the goods. And he did, towards the end of the trip. He rang the regiment up and said, Pete will be back in country. Can we, get him straight on the next course? And I did. So I got to train in Cambodia. So that was such a unique thing in itself. In Cambodia, people don't run unless you're under, punishments. So seeing a dude running around would worry them. Because I had a rifle, it's not like I could leave it behind. I had to take that everywhere I went. So now I'm a dude running down the road with a rifle. So you get interesting looks with that one. And then, I was training for the 3.2 kilometre run, for example. You're running with rifle and a webbing. So you're looking even more aggressive. So it was fun. You had to really make sure that people around town knew what you were doing. Plus, just being in an amazing environment like Cambodia was just such a great trip.
Yeah, pretty phenomenal to get that early in your career and the trust. Pretty young guy coming through infantry, and you're getting a lot of trust and a lot of responsibility from a young age. That was pretty pivotal by the sounds of it.
Very much so. I think that trip definitely set me up for the way that I see the world today.
Yeah. So following selection, a bit of time with 2 Squadron, SASR. How was that experience?
It was, being a part of the regiment was quite an amazing thing, So, when I think back, I was like 22 when I passed my selection course. It probably would have been a smarter idea to stay in the battalions a little bit longer and learn. Most of the guys that I went through with were significantly older, married guys, a bit more settled, where, when they say to you, you should be older when you do it, you're like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. But in the reality of it, you're not. So I got into the regiment and enjoyed it. Got through my courses, got into the squadron, had a good time. Loved doing the trips, loved the calibre of training. The unit itself can be very clucky at times. If you don't fit in, it can cause you a bit of pain. And sometimes I didn't fit in, and that was by, probably actions, not blaming anything on anybody else. Yeah, I mean, I got a trip with the regiment. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I got to go, and again, adding to that professional maturity. Being back at home was fantastic as well. Being back with all my friends and being able to go on legacy stuff, because I'd grown up as a legacy kid. Doing as much legacy stuff as I could, and just being a part of one of the greatest units in the world was amazing.
For sure. And following that experience, you actually were involved in the setup of the Permanent Commando unit out east.
Yeah, well, after I'd done a couple of cycles, I was contemplating discharge. I didn't really know what the next step was, and I had a young family, and that was failing dismally. So I really didn't know what the path ahead for me was going to be. I was trying to find the right course of action. And my SSM said to me, "Have you thought about, commandos?" And at the time, I was like, "Oh, why would I want to go and do that?" It's sort of, it wasn't overly appealing. But as I thought about it a little bit more, and I thought about the opportunities that it presented, to go to a unit that was going to be Australia's next, special operations unit, that had all these young guys coming in, young guy myself, but all these people who wanted to come in, who really wanted to be a part of a new capability and how that would work. It appealed, and I thought, well, it can't be any worse than what I've got for time away. So the opportunity to save my family and all that sort of stuff was there. So I stuck my hand up, went across. I suppose I was a bit naive to it because the reality is you're building your units. So your time away is going to be a lot. There's a lot of courses that need to be conducted and a lot of input, and there needs to be people who have that right amount of drive to force things forward. To make change, to create capabilities, and so on. So, but the unit, continued to grow, and it was really good to be a part of that and watch that evolution of developing something new.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then shortly after I joined, in fact, when East Timor kicked off, it was really a step up and a ramp up in the ADS involvement. Clearly, we had a very significant part to play over there in East Timor. Under the leadership of General Cosgrove, you were over there with the newly formed Commando unit.
So we didn't get on that first push, the 99 push, because the unit really didn't have any operational serials at that time. So when it came for that first rotation out, the unit was well presented to be there. So we worked up for that. And unfortunately, all those commando capabilities that we were working along at, with the amphibious stuff, had to take a backwards step. And what they did was they distributed some commandos around the place, but as a majority, they were in B Company. I was in recon snipers. And then they filled the rest of the unit up with guys, coming out of IETs and guys from other battalions who shifted across to do that particular rotation. But I suppose what was really cool about that is we did the trip. So again, it gave that operational maturity and the leadership side of things. We had an excellent CO, good RSM, good hierarchy across the unit. So when we came back and then they rolled back into the commando things, or the commando operations, the young fellas who weren't very qualified were given the opportunity to do the next selection course or go back or go to a battalion. Some chose to go to battalion. Those who went on selection, some failed, went to a battalion. The rest stayed within the unit. So it gave us that manning and the ability to then kick off again and start, really cranking it up. It really injected a lot of guys into the unit to start that evolution. And with that came very, very shortly after, the Tag East capability. So we had to start standing that up as well. So, doing the green rolls capability, standing up a black roll. There was a lot going on. And it was really quite exciting to be a part of all of that.
Yeah. So for those less familiar with the terms there, obviously green roll, traditional jungle, desert, combat operations out there in the field, and black roll, a counter-terrorist role in the built-up environment. And the trigger there, no doubt, would have been 9/11 terrorist attacks.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
In hindsight, though, when I was back at SASR, there had always been that whisper that we would be looking at a separate tag. So you'd have a Tag East and a Tag West, which, when you think back, it's common sense. We're so geographically separated. There was always a requirement to have a tag on each side of the country. And and basically operating under the same sort of procedures.
Yeah, sure.
I suppose. So it was always going to happen, even though, we thought, now it's going to happen because of 9/11, but it was always on the cards, I think.
We might come back to this a little bit later, but interesting your point there about family failing prior to your or during your first SASR tour. Even though there were some operations there and sometimes setting up a new unit in the East Coast with a commando regiment, the pace of operations and my probably closest parallel there was from my Navy time deployed and then C-17 time, flying where I was 4 or 5 months a year away. Super demanding, even when you're not deployed, even when you're at home training and setting up another unit. The demands on the individual and on the family is just quite severe.
I think back to when I was a really young soldier in 3RAR, and I used to look at the marriedies and where they'd met their wives and, the stories behind that. And I used to, see so many marriages failing. And I thought, I don't want to be one of these guys, I don't want to live in the lines, meet a chick, get married, that fail, and then, funny enough, you're living back in the lines again, and that that continued flow on a narrative. So when I got across to Perth and I met my first wife, I was very determined to make sure that I could balance it. And you know what? It all started off great. We were a great couple. We had great fun. We went to lots of places. We had family interests. Her family knew my family in history and things like that. And I thought it'd be all good. But the demand to be in the workplace, starts to pay its toll. And especially, around the time you start thinking about having kids or having kids, and they're doing it on their own a lot. And you hope they step up, but you don't really realise, you think too much about your own personal space. I'm busy at work, I've got this commitment, I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And you lose track of the complexities of trying to manage both, I suppose. And, when it comes to my first wife, sometimes I don't give her the respect that she really deserved. There was a huge expectation. We were very young. She was 5 years younger than me, back in those days. And I was asking her to look after children while I, went off flying around the world or doing something, she was on her own a hell of a lot, and it has an impact on them. So it does make it different. And I suppose one of the worst things for us as soldiers too, when we're in our workspace and we're doing what we want to do and we enjoy doing it, for me, it might have been, being on a course, sniper's course or something like that, you're learning to fly. We become so involved, and when things are going well in there, you put more time into it, and it consumes us, and that's where that difference is, I suppose, in the defence space, where we're not just employees, we're not, just going to work and, doing our work function. We drag that home with us, even when we are at home. We're still on the computer trying to work out how we're going to make this work and who we've got to liaise with to make it all happen. So it does have a massive impact, and we don't see it. We get caught up in our own little space. Yeah,
you're 100% on the money, mate. I think I was in my early to mid-30s before I started to really think about what those things I could do for my partner were that were really going to help her out, whilst accommodating some really demanding missions. Before that, like you said, I was 100% job-focused, very little bandwidth outside of that. So big challenge for our young guys and girls.
Yeah. The challenge will always be there. I think that if we're smart, though, as the leadership is maturing in ADF, and not just ADF, I think it's got to be, police emergency service and all those sort of things that are like-minded. If we acknowledge that and we use the people that have learnt and the examples of the past, we can set our people up for success, though. Mm-hmm. Where I think, especially in the 90s and that, we were very blinded to it all. We were so operationally focused, and we forgot about the families. And it goes back to that Vietnam thing, learn all these things, forget all these things, learn all of them all again and then forget them all again. Let's not forget.
Yeah, and I think the climate and the tone, certainly after 20 years of Middle Eastern conflict and the emphasis placed on Defence Force and veterans, now that tone's changing, and we'll delve into that a little bit later on about the work you're doing in particular. But before that, you went off to the British Army. Yeah. You went through your career and you had some pretty interesting experiences there.
It was very interesting being with the Poms. So in the build-up to the Iraq War, Second Iraq War, commandos were starting to gear up and they were looking at, deploying forward. The RSM had a chat to me and said, how you going with all your divorce stuff and your custody stuff? And I was like, not good, mate, not good. And he goes, well, you're going to be in a position to deploy with these guys? And I said, probably not. I had to put my hand on my heart and say, well, as much as I want to go, but I can't go. And he was great about it. He was a fantastic guy. He was an ex-British lateral anyway. So I stayed behind, and then the guys had deployed, and I felt horrible. Sitting there because all my friends had gone away, and I'm trying to go through all this court action stuff, which was just horrible. There's no other way to say. When you're going through family court and everything, it's as bad as it gets. So the RSM hadn't deployed. He was heading over sort of shortly after, and he said, "Mate, there's a trip coming up. If you're in a position to go, I'd like to send you over to England for a bit." I said, yeah, beauty. If it sort of works out, and it did. The stars aligned. Not long after, I was on a plane to England. I was met by one of the soldiers there, took me up to the unit, and they said, look, we're heading off to Iraq in a couple of days, mate. Do you want to come? I was like, yeah, beauty. So I got some pommy issues and did some quick bit of, SOP sort of stuff and was on a plane.
Straight into it.
It was gold. Yeah, it was really good. The Poms treated me really well. But they still see us as the bloody colonials who don't know anything.
Yeah.
So that was unique. But I suppose, once they start seeing the way that you work and they get comfortable with it, like anything, if we're giving somebody else too, we're going to always have a good look before we invite them to play too much.
Very good. So that was Iraq 2003. And by 2006, you were back in Australia with 4RAR and not long after that off to Timor.
Yep. So I came back into then 4RAR. Just went back into a company. It was all good, plodding along. And then, so I knew I'd be going to PDS, so the Parachute Training School at some stage. So I'd been taking a few guys down there, getting more jumps up, getting more skills up and that. I was already a jump master and looking at doing my parachute jump instructor's course. So I was spending more and more time down there. And then Timor just come out of the blue. But I got a call. I was down there with a bunch of my guys, and they said, you need to get back up here. Got into Sydney, and then we pretty much had a brief, and we were on our way to Darwin. So it was that snap was out of blue. They had that issue in Dili with the police, and before you knew it, we were in country, and we ended up staying there for like 8 months. So we were there a hell of a lot longer than we thought we would be. Some of the elements went home earlier. I was pleased, I suppose, that I got to stay on. The FE sort of split, and some went on Fiji. So they jumped on the boats, went across to Fiji, and that was the incident that, say, Josh Porter was killed in, unfortunately. And then the rest of us had stayed in Timor, and then they continued that rotation out of the airfield on for a couple of years there. But it was really good. It was a different type of trip completely. With that first Timor trip that I went on where, we were out patrolling along the borders, providing the security. There was a lot of, dysfunction in Dili itself. Mm-hmm. And it was something that you got to look at it, I suppose, from a special operations point of view, really looking at who were the government figures and how they had control over the people. So it was a really good trip and a really maturing trip, I suppose, from a professional side of things.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. Quite experienced by then. You'd been to Cambodia, Timor, a tour with the British Army, Iraq, during some pretty active parts of that 2003 campaign with a lot of coalition action in that theatre, and now you're back to Timor, much more experienced. How did that manifest in terms of your behaviour, your approach, and your leadership?
I think as far as having a bit of operational maturity through there, it was again another great opportunity to see that evolution in the things that we're doing, and I suppose. On that, it's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about my career. there was a lot of highs and a lot of lows, and that comes with any career. But to continue to go on operations, to continue to see, great, inspiring leadership. My OC for that trip and I will call him out, was a guy called Ian Langford. Ian, an extremely professional guy, intelligent, should go the whole distance in defence, just really a pleasure to watch the guy operate in the way that he moved around and use his men. So, in that sense, great job. I had an Alpha, so I was a Bravo for that trip, so an Alpha first in command, the Bravo's the second. My first Alpha was found wanting. It's probably the nicest way to say it. And then during the trip, Langers removed him and put another person in command who was exceptional, and I love the guy, love him to this day. We went on to become very good friends, and we went to Afghanistan together in 2010 and that sort of thing. But then he had to go back in role, so a new boss come in, Lockie, and he was outstanding. Him and I, from the first time we met each other, got along. Langers called it. He said, as soon as you see this guy, you'll get along with him. I'm like, I don't care. I want to keep at him. And he's like, nah, you'll get Lockie. Lockie came in, great bloke, fantastic, intelligent operator. So again, it was really good for such a small trip. I got to really be influenced by some different styles of leadership, some good, some bad, and watched how they projected themselves within the key leadership engagement, which was what we were really doing in that trip. From a special operations point of view, those sort of trips, they are about setting up the local leadership in the right direction and providing a sounding board for their leadership to also ask questions to, in that growth phase. So, the trip was so different. It was very complex. And I know I only called out, my direct leadership in that, but, watching each level again, the then CEO of SASR, for example, great leadership, the way he voiced his, I won't say opinion because it wasn't an opinion, but, that guidance and leadership to the key leadership of Timor, again, was quite amazing, because we're talking about, at this lower level within Australia that are having such a huge impact on the leadership of a country, an emerging country. So, it really was a pleasure to be able to sit back and see how those conversations would shape how things would unroll. So it was really good, very maturing again, and great, I suppose, for my own development going through, identifying problems, how to deal with those, and how you make those smaller problems or big problems, but you fix them at that smallest element to have that pathway. So really cool. Loved it.
Really pivotal and important developmental experience in your career.
Bloody oath. Really.
Yeah, it's funny. The Australian Army is really well renowned for their training, leadership, and mentoring. It really has been since World War II at least going forward, and that's been the case in Iraq and Afghanistan, and certainly what you're saying here in Timor. One of the things, I suppose, with that, Australians, what I think that we care more than most. Again, it goes back to that thing. The job. It's not just a job; it's a way of life, and the things that we do, they have that impact, and we seem as Australians to just care about the welfare of everybody, and it shows in our actions with dealing with people. I think Aussies are very well positioned to do well. Pete, tell me about the next couple of years and your route through to your experience in Afghanistan in 2010.
I knew that Alpha were going to Afghanistan. And
sorry, Pete, this is back to 2 Commando Regiment in Sydney.
2 Commando, yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I knew they were going to Afghanistan on sort of the next rotation. I'd been tipped off that I was down to be a Bravo for one of the platoons to go. So I was really excited that I'd get to go to Afghanistan as a Bravo. So we started doing the build-up for that, which was a really busy time. But really exciting. After coming from the school, after basically you don't have a weapon in your hand for that 2 years. All you're doing is teaching parachuting, which I think is a problem in itself. I think all units should primarily, always conduct those primary skills, and remember where infantry first, or warfighters first, and then we teach a skill as a secondary thing, you know. So that was one of the things I didn't like about the school. We didn't pick up a weapon. We didn't go shooting. We didn't do any of those, you know, fundamental things that we did. We just worried about parachuting because you get overly engulfed in that. Then, you know, and you just think jumping is your life. Well, you're a soldier, and it's not.
I know what you mean. Going very, very deep on the most minuscule detail, and yeah, you can lose context at times.
Yeah, bloody oath. So anyway, we started building up towards Afghanistan for 2010. And I was really lucky. We had a very diverse leadership team. We had an OC that I have a lot of time for, and I was really looking forward after hearing him talk about what his plan was for 2010. I found it quite exciting. You know, like he wanted to go into Shanatu, so a place in Afghanistan in Oruzgan province, sort of, you know, between northern Kandahar and Oruzgan. Which was, you know, it was very high Taliban area. People have tried to get in there from, you know, the dawn of time. He wanted to go in and he wanted to fly in and we'd do a dismounted, you know, assault on the village. And, you know, huge risk with that one. You know, so many people have tried to go in a vehicle and had their asses handed to them. You know, he was sure that he wanted to do this.
So dismounted, of course, on foot. So helicopters in there, everybody disembarks the helicopters, and then all the troops are moving in.
So it was a very ambitious plan. You know, in my time in Afghanistan, I'd seen the Dutch try to get in there. I'd seen the US try to get in there by using vehicles, and they just got their asses handed to them quite early. So it was quite exciting to think about it and read the patrol reports for people who had been there beforehand. And then start, you know, that planning phase to go. So the OC had really planned quite an amazing trip. So we were really looking forward to it. There was a lot of expectation, and as you know, as that trip went on to, you know, it ended up being a battle honour. You know, the Battle of Shuwali Kot is, you know, part of that Shanatu Kajaki, so 2 Commando and SAS operation become the Battle of Shuwali Kot. So, yeah, pretty amazing to be a part of.
Yeah, indeed. Very, very famous in terms of our recent years' engagement over there for the Defence Force and particularly Special Forces. During that period, and in fact in 2010, very sadly we lost 3 of our best in a Blackhawk helicopter crash that you were intimately involved with. And you in fact walked away with some very significant injuries. Tell me about the lead up to that and the incident itself.
Well, I suppose the place to start is Shanatu. So the Battle of Shanatu itself took about 6 days. So, you know, we flew in helicopters, you know, landed on the high features in most cases, you know, secured the area. Then FE Alpha, so SASR, had their contact in Kajaki, so that's where Ben Robert Smith won his Victoria Cross. So that was basically just a hop away from us. It was quite close, very, very close. So those incidents happened. So after we come back from that, we then started a series of targeting serials. So a lot of the fighting age males started to withdraw south to Kandahar. So what the serials were designed to do was, as they went south, we would then hit the villages and try to treat as many of those fighting age males as possible as they were going down. So one day, you know, for example, your platoon would go out and my platoon would stay as a reserve and only come in if required. So they would go under the ground, do what they had to do, they would fly home. So a couple of hour mission each time. Same, then the next day my platoon would go and yours would stay behind. So Oscar and November are the 2 platoons who conducted that. On the last day of those targeting serials, we went in on one of the targets. Very, very dark, extremely dark night. The pilot made an error en route, and my aircraft, which was the first aircraft of 4 en route, struck the ground and crashed. So rolled over a few times, and out of that impact, we in the end lost 3 Australians and 1 American. So yeah.
Yeah, very sad incident. I remember quite distinctly at the time. And Peter, will say that the three gentlemen we lost on that particular incident were Private Timothy Applin, Private Benjamin Chuck, and Private Scott Palmer.
That is correct.
And yourself actually came away with some significant injuries, which saw you, out of action and in fact in rehabilitation for some time.
Yeah, I did sustain a lot of injuries, but I was a very, very lucky one. I can only remember a very, very short part of the crash. So I remember being in my room. I remember having conversations. One of the boys from the who was coming on the mission had come to have a chat to me. He had left my room. We were very soon going to orders. I was watching a movie. I pressed play after he left, and I woke up in a hospital in Germany. So all of the bits that had to come back in time. So when I woke up, it was instantaneous. So there was no lag. I wasn't tired or anything like that. It was literally like I'd blinked. So it was a really weird sort of situation. But then as I started to get things back, when I was laying in the hospital bed and you're sort of looking up at the roof trying to pick it all back, I got the memory of being in the aircraft. I remember where I was sitting. I remember get given the 3-minute mark. So 3-minute mark is that finals onto target. Mm-hmm. I'd put my night vision gear, flicked them down, looked down, and the ground was right next to me. So a second later we'd struck the ground, and then I suppose it all went very real from there. So with that process of things, so I suppose I was taken to Northern Kandahar, to Kandahar Hospital, then moved on to Germany, and then in Germany, so we were really just stabilised, and then moved to Germany. Germany do all your life-saving stuff, and then you're sent back home. So all of us ended up at Westmead Hospital, and most of us were in ICU. So we had 3 of us, myself and 2 Garys, Gary Robinson, Gary Wilson, were in the ICU proper, and then they had a room off to the side, which was like a storage room that they had converted for the other guys in there. So they had beds in there, but they weren't part of the ICU proper, but could still receive ICU care where required. So they were all together. So it was pretty cool setup that they had.
So your rehabilitation and recuperation, that was quite extensive. Your injuries were towards the greatest extent seen in that campaign in terms of the amount of injuries you sustained across the scope of your body. But now you're back, you're in one piece and you're preparing for a triathlon. So tell me about the road physically and mentally back through injury.
The rehab stuff is a unique process. From the first time you open your eyes to where you want to be is a long time. I suppose I was very lucky in the early stages of it. So I had a brain injury. I had a frontal lobe bleed. Because of the frontal lobe bleed, I didn't really understand just the sheer enormity of it. There was times where I had conversations where I had complete clarity. Like, back in Germany, for example, the most senior Australian and the RSM had come to visit me. So John Campbell and Don Spinks visited me in hospital, and I remember John Campbell saying to me, you get it, your career's over. And he wasn't saying it to be, a jerk or anything. It was, just part of the conversation. And he was actually quite emotional during the whole conversation that we had in the bed. So I suppose that the conversation led me to the point that I knew that going forward, there probably wasn't going to be a military career. Or actually, I was 100% certain there wasn't going to be a military career in it. We were still trying to work out if my leg was going to stay on or not. But I suppose in hindsight, like some might say, oh, you shouldn't say that to somebody so early. But it gave me the chance to understand right from the start that things had to change. And I had to have some sort of realism. And I found it really weird because John Campbell, he was talking about the 3 guys who had died, and he was talking about my injuries and that. And John started to cry. And we're talking... I also cried as well. And it's funny because when you read his book, he tells it the other way around, that I was crying first and then he cried. But, I'm sitting there on the bed and there's the whole realism of what's going on. But it was from that start, from those first conversations that I thought, well, I need to start shaping things in my head. I need to understand the way forward from here. So, John left. Because of the brain injury, I was sometimes good, sometimes bad. I was mostly aggressive. So I was all over the shop on my understanding of how things worked. So right from the very start, I knew I had to start getting some sort of grip of my own mind so I could have some realistic expectations. And I mean, the brain injury stuff was so absurd at times, and depending on what operation you had and the meds that you were having would how that would affect you. Like sometimes it was so much greater, like I'd be bat crap crazy and all that sort of stuff, and other times I'd be okay. So when I had those periods of clarity, I really concentrated on trying to work out what I wanted. What I was so petrified of was I was a father of 2 children at the time, and I knew I had a responsibility towards them. I was so frightened to be in a nutcase in a mental institution in Perth, which was then called Greylands, and I was so scared of that. So, I wanted to, it's a priority one, be a good father. And I still wanted to live a life that was going to have a degree of quality to it. I didn't know how much there was going to be because of, those injuries, and we were still looking at how they were going to impact. But it was really good to start setting those goals right from the start and finding what I wanted to be and how I was going to explore the goals.
I think a perfect time here, Pete, to talk about you wrapping up your Army career and your Special Forces career, looking towards those goals, and in fact those goals becoming assisting with others in need, mental and physical ailments, and the transition out of defence. And that's a space you've spent a lot of time and effort in, and a space you're in now. How did you come to really hone in on that area to devote your later career to and your life to as you left Army?
I'm actually really glad you asked that, because I got to give a bit of credit to somebody. So in those early days where I was still struggling with my own control, I still had guys come and sit on my bed and ask me what was going to happen to their career and all that sort of stuff. Other guys who had been wounded, and I'm like, oh Jesus, I can barely control my own mind, let alone try to think yours through. But I'd give them my best attempt at trying to do it. And obviously this is as my headspace had started to clear and the brain injury was starting to subside. But my CO asked me directly, what are you going to do, Pete? And I love the fact that he said, no matter what, man, we're here for you. We will provide, anything that you need. But, have those realistic expectations. Think about what you want. There is more to just wearing green. And I loved it for him. I loved him for it. And I'll call him out, Brett Challoner, the brigade commander over in 13 Brigade in Perth. Brett is an absolute champion, man. And he said, whatever I can do, I will facilitate for you, sort of stuff. So he also said, I want you to think about, going back to school. There's some new programs around, and J43 is one of them, and J43 is about guys like battle cas, been around for a while, who needs to separate because of their injuries, and probably won't be able to work a full-time job, but they'll give you something where you can have employment around.
Sure. So
it was a great initiative from Defence. And anyway, Brett suggested that I become a counsellor, but I sat there and I thought about it, and inevitably that's what I did. So I looked at the pathway that I needed to do to make that happen. Defence were also being really good to me in the sense of saying, as I got better and I was getting better beyond anybody's thoughts, but they had, looked at options. We could get a posting for you in Canberra, we could do this, can we do that? But I was really sort of struggling with fatigue. And also I was really big on realistic expectations. It's one thing to say, I can stay in defence and I can do this job, but what if I can't? What if I am counselling people and, I've got somebody who's really struggling and I'm turning up to work one day and I don't turn up the next day and they got nobody to talk to. So I didn't ever want to be somebody who would let people down. And I also had that attitude of that I think that a lot of people stay in defence for too long, and they hold positions purely to draw a salary. They don't really contribute. So I didn't want to be that dude. We kept Pete because, he's in helicopter craft, he's an institution, you just hold him over there. I wanted to be productive. And then when I looked at what my goals were and how I wanted to fill my time, I realised I could do that outside of defence far better than what I could do it inside defence. I've always been that type of guy. When I've got something to say, I'll say it anyway. Sometimes in the career, it can be detrimental in the defence space. We don't like that at times, but sometimes we love it. So it's weird. But my decision was that my injuries were significant enough anyway. I didn't want to impact. I knew that I needed to make change, so I had to embrace that change. I got out, and I have been afforded all of those luxuries. I get to say things to people that a person in a uniform can't, and I get away with it because I'm trying to do it for the common good, not for self-gain. So leaving defence for me was a great idea. Getting those qualifications that defence was so happy to pay for was good. And out of all of it, I think that it left me with a real thought. I see it in this. It's not that I'm giving back. It's about creating an opportunity to push forward. And that's the sort of difference. I don't want to ever, Pete does this because he's just giving back. No, I identify there's a problem here and I want to see what I can do to, I've identified it and now to make it better.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's fair to say, someone with your experience, background and the training you picked up is uniquely placed for that. There's not many I could say that are better positioned than yourself to progress the discussion as you're doing at the moment. Pete, what skills and qualifications did you pick up on the way out of Army that you've since put to work and put to use?
So I picked up the counselling and community services to start with. So I had to do, before they'd let me onto it, and because I'd had a brain injury, I had to go back and do a cognitive testing phase, where it lasted about 6 months. So I did the initial testing, and then I had to do everyday testing to show that I could remember things, because as part of the frontal lobe bleed, it affects your short-term memory, and not just what comes with that is the things that come out of your mouth when you have a frontal lobe bleed can be a bit of a shock to people. You really have to learn to sort of control that. And that takes a bit of time. So that was why Craig came over. He looked at the schools. He spoke to the school and says, Pete might be inappropriate. At a time, it's not his fault. So the discussion was had, and defence really set me up for success. And when you're trying to become a counsellor, you can't be saying things out of turn. So it becomes a bit complicated in that environment. Yeah, some of the people don't like what you have to say. So that was really great. I was led by the hand a little bit there. Beautifully looked after by defence. So I got the 4 diplomas out there. And then I was very, very big about, in defence, we're healthy people. Everything we do is healthy. We go to work at 7:30 in the morning, we call the roll, we go and do PT. We knock off a couple of hours of PT, have breakfast together and then, start our work day. And most of the time, our work day is quite physical anyway, unless, you're a guy or girl who works, behind a desk. So we have such a strong physical element of our lifestyle. And now all of a sudden, when we're talking about guys and girls who have left defence, they're not doing, they're having, say, mental issues or coping issues and so on, but they're not doing PT. And part of that PT, when you're running around the ring road at Holsworthy, where's your headspace? Just anywhere. And it was so great just to be anywhere, just not thinking about stuff.
The harder you work, the less you're in your mind, because you can't be. You just cannot be there whilst you're putting in hard and you're training to your heart's extent. My favourite stuff was early morning activity in Navy parlance, which was 5:30, 6 a.m, out there going hard for 45 minutes, shower, breakfast, into the workday. Nothing like it.
Yeah.
Nothing like it.
Bloody, see, that's exactly it. There's, we did that for so long, and it was part of our life, and we'd have a smile on our face. It was just a great way to start a day. And then what people were doing was they'd forgotten that, even if they weren't having mental health issues for leaving defence, or what they'd seen in defence, or what they'd done in defence, just that change from what is now normal. I was starting to see repeat itself so often and not just in ex-defence members, you know, as in, you know, again, you know, fireys, coppers, you know, all the different things.
So, Pete, just for context, this is your company you set up after doing your counselling qualifications, and it was focusing on mental health, depression, anxiety, PTSD with ex-defence personnel and also fire and police personnel.
In that transition of education, so once I'd sort of set I did my Cert 3, Cert 4 and all that sort of stuff. So there was that collaboration between the fitness, physical affecting mental health and so on. So I had that going there. So I went down to fire and rescue, and I said, look, you know, I want to join, blah, blah, blah. Told them my history. I told them about my injury sort of stuff and just how I had to be careful to manage that. And they were so happy to get me on board, and it was all cool. And then on the leadership sort of stuff, I started mentoring and providing like training outcomes for the station. Like the local captain had asked me to put these outcomes because he hadn't been really put in the space of, you know, cause and effect. You know, conducting this training to affect this in the long run. You know, the big scam. So we've become quite good friends, and out of that I got asked to be on the incident management teams for the goldfields. So I was learning about how they conducted that incident management and how you escalate that in a civilian sector.
So we're talking like issues and incidents in the mining site where there's injuries to do with heavy equipment or other sorts of things, and you've got a remote location, let's say out in the Pilbara or somewhere in WA or wherever, and you've got a crisis situation to be dealt with.
Yes. Exactly that type of stuff, you know, how we escalate that, you know, if it's a fire, you know, how many people are we going to put out there? Where can we take, equipment from and people and still be able to have an effective unit in both locations and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So, it was great. It opened the mind up and started me thinking. But then as I was talking to people, they just said, hang on, Pete, what skills did you have in defence? And I was running through, you know, that I'd done my Cert 4 and all that sort of stuff and blah, blah, blah. And they said, do you know you could actually run all of our courses? And I was like, what? And because it's a little bit different in their space. You do a course to learn how to instruct on the course. You don't necessarily have to be qualified in that course yourself to be able to instruct it. So I went and did that course so I could then run all training for you know, within our district and all that sort of stuff. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. And then as part of picking that up, fireys were doing a mental health first aid course. But so I suppose just to step back a little bit, when I did my counselling, I did my residential phase of that with WA Police. So my wife was a police officer, and I had lots and lots of friends in the space. I knew the welfare officer for police, and they invited me to do my residential with them. So I got to see things from that. It was great to come in at that level instead of, you know, just going somewhere where nobody cared. I got to come in, I got to read everything, I got to learn, I got a lot of collaboration stuff over a short period of time. So again, I had learnt so much there. And then it all sort of set me up for those last couple of courses. I did the police mentoring course as part of doing, you know, while I was on the residential. And then they had a couple of fireys who were on it to look at how they were going to design their course. And then, because when I was then in fireys, I then came across and did stuff with them. So I was involved with the implementation of the course product as well as getting to do it as well. So it gave me greater knowledge across. So I went from, you know, sort of, zero in this space to, you know, 4 diplomas, to Cert 3, Cert 4 in fitness, police mentoring, done army mentoring as well, done the Air Force, fireys, you know, and so I picked up so many things so quickly, and it was really cool. I got right across it.
So that's really fascinating, Pete. You've gone from 28 years in uniform, extensive deployment history, lots of combat experience and exposure, and within a couple of years, you're fully qualified on the outside, mentoring, mental health, counselling. And it sounds like that was your almost like transition complete. You know, you were ready to go, you were qualified, you knew how things worked in the civilian business sphere and how to apply your skills and experience, you know, aiding others.
I was certainly very lucky to pick it up. And I suppose to help that though, I think that because of the defence background, remembering, especially in the special operations world, one of the really cool things about it is so many people, and it goes back to, what we were talking about beforehand, whenever we do anything, we do it holistically and we really throw ourselves into it, So many soldiers, they're not just pilots, they're outstanding at what they do. They know every aspect of that aircraft. They know what other people are doing, same. Everything across defence, we become so involved in it. In that transition, when I went into the civilian stuff, if there was, we had those fireys who were exactly the same. They lived and they breathed it. If you didn't watch and learn from them, you're a fool. And so the qualities that we bring, they're there, you're already acting on them. But if you open your eyes, you'll see the person next to you doing that, learn from them. Same, the next course on, do that, learn from them. So you're finding like-minded people as well. So it has that continuity of learning. Mm-hmm. So even though you've left defence, you've still found quality. You've found quality people.
Peter, I want to move on shortly to your work with the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide. But before that, your involvement with the RSL as an ambassador. Let's touch on that and how you came to become involved in the Royal Commission, which is ongoing.
My position as an ambassador, I suppose the place to start was I had no desire in having anything to do with the RSL. Not because they'd been bad to me or anything like that. Matter of fact, they'd been amazing to my mum growing up. She was a war widow, and trying to bring me up on a war widow's pension is a hard, especially in those days, was a hard task. So they'd always been fantastic. They'd always reached out to Mum, both RSL and Legacy. But when I joined the Army, I didn't really, when you come over from WA and you're in the east side of the country, I just seen it as the club. I thought the services club and RSL were the same thing. So I thought they were making lots of money off soldiers and widows and all that sort of stuff. And I hate gambling, by the way. I really, really struggled with it. I thought I don't want to go there and see people just losing their money. And then when I did my subject courses, we were invited to the RSL and, they put on dinners and all that sort of stuff. And again, it still didn't have an appeal because I wasn't seeing like-minded people in my own age group and all of that sort of stuff. So again, I had no interest. I got involved in the Invictus program whilst I was in defence, and then, afterwards, so the Defence Adaptive Sports stuff and that. And the brigadier who ran the sports cell, Brigadier Phil Winter, told me that he was interested in moving into the RSL space, and he was going to apply for the job as the national CEO of RSL. And I have a lot of time for Phil. Love the man to death. Good, intelligent officer. Thinks everything through very well and comes up with good solutions. And I'd worked very well with him in the Invictus sort of space anyway. And he said, "Mate, I'd love to get you in." I said, "Oh, doing what, mate? What do you want me to do?" He said, "Mate, I'd love to bring you on as an ambassador." And I said, "Well, okay, as an ambassador, but doing what? It's just a word. How would I value add to this organisation?" And he said, "There's plenty of ways," and we had a brief sort of discussion with it. And I said, "Mate, we'll give it a try, we'll give it a roll." And he said, "Well, I'd like to have another couple of ambassadors and we'll leave it to you to pick them." So I went out there and I sort of did interviews on a few people without them knowing they were being interviewed. And then I come across one lady that I thought ambassadors has, I come from non-commissioned side, I wanted to have an officer and I wanted to have a female and I wanted to have not a physical injury. So I was very, very keen to find somebody who had a mental health issue for their service. So, I met this lovely lady. She had a mental health issue. She'd been transport. She'd been medic, and she was an officer. And the two of us hit it off like that. Her name's CJ. And so I said to Phil, "This is the person. I want this person to be my oppo," and he was in agreement. So together, we've been given a lot of opportunity, and we've got to go to some great places and speak. And part of picking somebody like CJ was I accepted that there was things that that I just can't know about. In the mental health space, yes, I might be a counsellor, and yes, I do lots of interviews with them, but it's not my lived experience. It's hers. So she brought something that resonates with different people, and RMC. One of the things about officers, especially with you guys, in your classes, you stay classmates forever and ever and ever, and you reach out and you all know each other and things like that. So to be able to look after people the best way was, in my mind, was to use somebody who is very comfortable in the environment, CJ, and somebody who's very comfortable in my environment, me. RSL at national leadership, I thought were being very well led by Phil's decision-making process. And what I loved was not just Phil, but the office on how they had value in what CJ and I had to say. Mm-hmm. So it seemed to be a really, really good fit.
Pete, we're in August 2022 at the moment, and the interim report from the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide has been released. You've been very closely involved with the Royal Commission. How did that come about? Tell me about the role that you're playing.
When the Royal Commission was sort of being set up, and there was such a strong push for a Royal Commission, and then government were debating what do we have. Mm-hmm. The national president, Greg Mellick, and it's sort of unfortunate, he gets absolutely smashed for this. Mm-hmm. Yet he was, this is what he does for a living. He's been in this space. So Greg recommended to the Prime Minister that it should be an enduring commission. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea of the enduring commission was the commissioners are always there. They're employed, if there's any dramas that can be brought up, and it's then actionable. And every 12 months, you bring out an interim commission report and you act on them. So it's quite a good thing, and it has longevity. And I suppose it would make a lot of people, quite accountable for their actions, because you're going, there's an enduring commission, I better be careful, I'm going to end up in front of that. So, but the PM didn't want that. Mm-hmm. He didn't want that. So he brought in the interim commission under Bernadette Boss, and gave them a lot of powers. I mean, the interim commission had all the powers of a Royal Commission, really. And Bernadette was a good choice. So RSL threw its weight behind the interim commission, and in agreement that would happen okay. But then a lot of people wanted a Royal Commission, and they were dead set on it. And whatever reason it was, for those people, because it varies for everyone, they wanted it, and the government then said, well, if this is what you want, this is what you'll get. So the first sitting of the Royal Commission was in Brisbane. A lot of people had thought that Greg Mellick had opposed straight out a Royal Commission, that RSL weren't in touch. But that was completely wrong. They didn't understand the details behind it. So it left Greg looking a bit like there was egg on his face. And it made the situation quite uncomfortable. And because I lived within an hour sort of drive, with the Gold Coast to Brisbane, and I was a national ambassador. But I got a phone call saying, do you want to go up and would you represent? We don't want the commission itself is more important than any other issue. We don't want anybody focusing in on Greg and taking away from the important thing here. So I was like, yeah, bloody oath. So I went up and I got a briefing for the media stuff. So I did, Channel 9, 10, ABC, all that sort of stuff the morning, and I represented the RSL. Initially I went up in a suit and just wore the return from active service badge. I felt like one of those really old dudes, and it was really weird. But I did all the interviews, and I enjoyed doing the interviews in the sense that, you sit there and you listen to stuff and you have your views on it. And, you think, geez, I wish I could speak up now. Well, actually, I got to do it with media. So I enjoyed that. And RSL got a media team, BCW, to come on board, and they conducted my briefings. So they would then listen to the trans and try to work out what was the best way, that we were learning what was happening in that day, and what RSL could do better to look after our veterans. So I really liked that. I thought, finally we're getting somewhere. People are spending money, we're learning and we're moving forward. So after the Brisbane one, they said, Pete, you did a good job. And so after the first day or so, instead of wearing the suit, I wore an RSL shirt with an RSL badge on it, and I sat in front of the camera, right in front of the camera. So every time, they switch to counsel assisting, guess who's sitting behind? Bam, you see my head and that badge. And there was plenty of people were getting on there and saying, it's good to see a younger guy, being in there. It's good to see RSL had used, common sense, put somebody in touch, somebody who understands, So it got really positive feedback. And then, people are messaging me, love to see you there, Pete, love that you're there, people who understand. And again, it grew and grew a bit more. Phil said to me, would you be prepared to do the next one? I said, yeah, bloody oath. So again, I went down to Sydney and I sat in, I did all the media stuff again. And BCW have stayed on with us. So they conduct all of my media briefings, and on Mondays I get a briefing as well. So all of the key figures from RSL and that sort of stuff all sit in on briefing. And again, because I sit there, and because, it's one thing to watch it on TV, but actually to sit in the room and hear each one, again, they have value in what I have to say and my thoughts on it. But being in that room and then hearing the way that the commissioners react to lived experience as opposed to evidence. So I'll quickly explain that. Lived experience is, so if I wanted to get up and I wanted to talk about my lived experience, I just talk. Mm-hmm. I don't get cross-examined. So anything that I've said could be complete and utter lies, or it might not be. But I'm not going to get cross-examined. Mm-hmm. Now, if, say, Chief of Army, Rick Burr gets up there, he's going to get cross-examined on everything he's done. So when I first got in there, it was really interesting to hear that. And I'm thinking, Jesus, I hope they're not just listening to these people. Because some of it's horrible, tear-jerking truth, but some of it is not. So I've always thought there should be a military person in the room.
And in that regard, given the lack of military experience there with some of the legal people involved, you've been able to provide really useful context and a sounding board to assist the commissioners, and you're really a trusted member of the commission as such.
Because I've had the continuity in the room, the commissioners might, they look up and they see the look on your face, so that, you learn to read each other a little bit. I think with counsel assisting, sometimes they'll come out again and they'll talk to me while we have a coffee, and I have had conversations with the commissioners over this as well. But I suppose it fills that gap a little bit. If they're in doubt on say some military terminology or mm-hmm. authenticity, they might throw that question sort of forward. So I think it fills that gap a bit, and because again there's that continuity. Again, every single time I'm sitting in the same spot, it doesn't matter which state, I've got the shirt on, they continue to say it. Everywhere I go now, a lot of different ESO leaderships will come up and have a chat to me. They want to know what I think, I like to think, that I'm slowly becoming sort of like a subject matter expert across with how it's happening. There's so much happening at the Royal Commission. What I mean as well, I suppose, and I don't want to detract from the key thing, that I think that the three commissioners that have been put into place, very intelligent, they're the right three people. There's a good mix of personalities there, and that's shown by the questions that they deliver when they do ask a question. That you can see what they're thinking about. Like say if I hear evidence on a Monday and then on a Wednesday, I will hear a question thrown at the person on the Wednesday that was created by somebody who was there on the Monday. So they're linking very well, and I like that there's that continuity of thought pattern where I think a lot of veterans thought, Royal Commission, here we go again. We're going to hear the same stuff over and over and over, and it's just words. But there's a real effort. There's a real genuine feeling, I suppose, behind a lot of it, and it's good to be able to see that. And then, like, say you come up to me and say, "Oh, Pete, what do you think of the Royal Commission? Do you think it's worth it?" And then I say that. It's good to see a soldier walk away from me and go, "Oh, no, I'm happy with this. Money's been well spent. Will there be a good result?" I think there'll be an excellent findings out of this. It's been set up to ensure that there are, and I'm so proud to be a part of that and play my part across a whole little chessboard there of significance. Some a lot, some a little. So it's pretty amazing.
It is, Pete. It is, and you're assisting greatly with the progress there. So well done, mate. Just touching on the interim report from the Royal Commission, which had quite a big emphasis on clearing the DVA backlog and assisting DVA in its workload and resourcing, and the other piece being, data gathering, so we have better evidence about how people are going and the true scope of mental health and suicide amongst defence veterans. You touched on the fact that it's going to take time for these things to be implemented, and certainly changes in resourcing of DVA will take time. How's your feeling about the role moving forward for the rest of the Royal Commission, noting that it's not due to wrap up, I think, until 2024?
I think with it wrapping up on 2024 is a good thing, for the extra time being asked. I sound a bit echoey all of a sudden.
Try moving your mic a bit closer to you.
Hello. That's better.
That's better.
Yeah, I must have tapped it. I just wanted to make sure. I think with it wrapping up in 2024 is good because it gives more time to hear, I suppose, stories with greater continuity. Mm-hmm. So one of the things as well with the commissioners, the way that they've started to shape things, initially they used to ask a question and the person would answer the question. But with each one of the either lived experience or evidence, they always ask them, how would you fix it? And I really love that we're going down that avenue. They're listening to people. If you've got up there and you want to have something to say, most people have got a plan on how they think they would fix it. Mm-hmm. I suppose if you hear the same plan enough, it gives them something to work off. And remembering, these commissioners, they never came from our space. So, trying to fix something they don't understand about, if they don't ask the question, they'd be a fool. So they're asking it and they're asking it well. The interim report, so out of the 12 odd recommendations for the interim report, there's no shockers there. There's zero shockers there. There's the obvious stuff. With when we look at legislation and the complexity of it, and the different acts, by bringing it out now, it gives government time to think about this one, because we know that was going to be, a result down the track. In 2024, it was always going to be there. Bam, number one. So government, if they're smart, we'll sit down and start putting heads in the room and say, well, what do we do? I heard evidence given by two professors from one of the university who are the gurus across the three acts. And I think Peggy Brown asked the question about, do we just scrap the old acts and write a new one? And they said, well, you can't do that. And they explained it all. And the complexity of it was just, it was amazing. And nobody, at the end of the day, so you got two scholars, all they've dedicated their life, their adult life, to learning about these acts. And they couldn't even explain it properly. The acts are difficult. Mm-hmm. I suppose the big thing is, again, how we move forward for people going forward. Mm-hmm. So those of us now under those three acts have a few dramas and live out our days under those, and then the next act is good. But then again, that's probably how we got the last act. So the discussion is now alive. Government have to sit there and they have to come up with a plan. Who they put in a room, how they do it, and how much money are they going to throw at this. And they've got a bit of time, but the more time they take, more complex, which has a flow-on effect, because if we think back, if there's these three acts and DVA, they've got to go under all of those, and they're talking 32,000 that they're behind. And it's so funny because it depends on who you talk to. Some will say 60,000, but another will say 32,000. And then when you want to totally stuff with your head, 32,000 claims, so we'll say it's 32,000. Is that 10,000 people or with a few claims each? Mm-hmm. Now, have they been put in on one set of paperwork, or have they trickle charged them? One today, one tomorrow, one the next. So now, as far as, people working in DVA trying to get through those claims, they need to group up, which are together. Again, nothing's changed for the people in DVA. They still have to investigate all these claims. And remembering there's not just 32,000 today. There's still, one going in tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So they're going to chase their tail for a while. One of the questions I was asked on the media the other day, I think it was Sky News, said, do you think that, they've given this too much time to fix it? They probably haven't given it enough. If we start just rushing things through, what's the answer there? Just let everybody's claims get through? Well, some of the claims are frivolous. As much as I hate to say it, there's plenty of people out there who've got completely fraudulent claims. You can get onto half these sites on Facebook which are telling people how to be fraudulent to get more points so they don't have to work again. People are openly saying things like, show me the money, and saying their defence career destroyed their life. Well, no, they haven't. They're just looking for the money check. But on the other side, we've got plenty of veterans who are legitimately, hurt or suffering that need to be looked after. So the due diligence has to be shown by DVA to look after these people, but also weed out the ridiculous claims as well.
And Pete, I think I want to take a moment here just to acknowledge especially junior people within DVA who are under enormous workload here, working through an extensive backlog of claims, which has now been realised to be even longer than expected. And they're dealing with the difficult legislative environment under 3 acts. They're dealing with resource shortages and with a lot of pressure from veterans, obviously, and from the community to resolve this very important issue. So I just want to make sure we recognise those people who are, working honestly and hard for the benefit of, their fellow Australians and those who've served the nation in uniform.
And I totally agree. They do an amazing job. And remembering they've got to follow the act. Everything. There's been times where I've rang DVA and I've said something and they said, I'm sorry, that's not under MERCA and you can't have it or whatever, And, I say, okay, thanks, no worries, move on. And I get really shocked that, some people just, want to yell and scream and carry on and treat these people horribly. And, they don't deserve it. They're doing their job.
Pete, what I want to touch on just to wrap things up is something we alluded to earlier, and that's you've spent extensive time in the Special Forces. I think the reputation and the significance of your community is well known across the nation. Recently, we've had the loss of Paul Green, esteemed rugby league player, rugby league coach, took his life to suicide. That's really impacted the rugby league and the broader Australian community quite harshly. I want to touch on the line between being someone who's very stoic, very self-reliant, very much someone who gets the job done and doesn't show weakness when in uniform, when doing their job, because that's how they've been trained to achieve the mission. And how do we balance that with the need to put our hand up, the need to show vulnerability, and the need to show that kind of strength to help ourselves? That's troubled me and that's vexed me for a long time, and I think we need to work harder there to provide those gateways for people and those ways to step forward. What are your thoughts, Pete?
As far as the environmental factors, around mental health, today they're better than they've ever been. Posted into units along the way where, how's your mental health, Pete? You can speak up. I've been told or constantly told. I've done jobs where, I've been constantly asked by, my superiors, right across. We're always so forward, speak up, speak up. I think, and especially the special operations world, you can come forward by all means and say there's a drama. It's not that you're going to be ostracised. People aren't going to go, put Pete in the corner over there and, wrap him up and he's all right, give him the long shirt. That sort of stuff, that's long gone. We care about each other, in our work environment, even if we don't like each other personally. We do make that available. We do say to each other, how can I help you? But so I think we're doing it very well. I think what you got to understand, that understanding your own workplace and understanding yourself. So in a special operations environment, so we have to be realistic about where we see ourselves. So maybe you miss the next trip, but you get the next one after. Defence are only ever going to remove the weapon if they see that you are unsafe, unsafe on a range, unsafe in the environment, not allowed to fly an aircraft and so on like that, if they see that issue. We need to be mature enough ourselves to understand that there's something going on and we need to tackle the issue and then move on. What is great that I see in a defence space is they're saying, by all means, come forward, and get the help that you need. And then when you're good to go, I'll put you back in. I spent millions training you, I'll put you back in. For some reason, we seem to think, no, as soon as I say that, I'm out. And we've got to have faith, and the system have got to show that. We've got to show as a system that, Pete's had a drama mental health. He's okay now. Syke said he's good. He's back into the job. So once Pete, that consumer confidence comes in, we're all right. Because right now the narrative is everybody's going, they'll take a weapon off me and I'll never get to do it again. That's not fact. That in some cases it occurs, and we have to look at it really holistically about how we move forward in that one. when it comes to getting better, one thing I can tell, if you don't action it and set those, short-term, mid-term, long-term goals, seek that professional help, you're not going to get better anyway.
Pete, I think you nailed it, right? Is it a short-term or a long-term viewpoint that we're taking? What's the point of taking a short-term viewpoint when it's only going to cascade and get worse? Certainly my experience, whereas a long-term view, put your hand up, get the help, get back to duty, be it flying, soldiering, whatever else, The system is there to support people, and I think more optics and more visibility around that is needed and is worthwhile. So I'm glad we're having the chat about it today. I think, in my experience, the aircrew domain is really pretty similar about being, taken away from flying status. But the long-term viewpoint, certainly defence is there to put people into those roles to get the job done, and I'm glad we could talk about it.
If our full rank structure is on board, from digger, corporal, sergeant, and through the officer side of things, we hold each other accountable as well. So if a person is having drama and he's been removed from the unit, so let's say it's a corporal, he's been removed from the unit, to fix that issue up, he's getting some. That's where the sergeants and the officers are speaking amongst themselves. Hey, we got Pete back here. How's he going? Let's go and see him. So it's got to be interactive across all of it. If we're looking after each other, we certainly will get our people back in the workplace as much as we can, and look after them.
Indeed, Pete. Look, 28 years in uniform and now assisting out across the board in a number of capacities in the veteran space and also for emergency services. What's the next couple of years hold for Pete Rudland?
I am very lucky that I get to be basically the primary parent for an 8-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter. I do have a 25-year-old and a 22-year-old to my first wife, and they're in WA, and they're all grown up and they're looking after themselves. But I get to spend so much one-on-one time with my 2 little ones. I got to go and see, book fair this week and, the book parade. And so trying to be the best father I can be, to be there for those 2. Be a good husband, of course, and all that as well. They're primary things. I want to continue to be within the RSL space, and I would love to see it, with young veterans in control, taking it into the next generation. That's a big one. We have those assets, we have those money, and we need to look after each other. I'm also on a project, the Liverpool Plains project, and it's about putting, thousands of trees that are for koalas across an area there. So it's called the Kokoda Walk, and every kilometre through that they'll have one of the villages of Kokoda there and the history of that. And then at the end, or every 500 metres, I want it to be a modern warfare stuff. So, story of Timor, story of Iraq and so on. And that'll be sort of set up, for caravanners to go through and people to go through. So, like sort of the Mecca for the grey nomads and that. So it's a project being set up down there, and they asked me to come on as an ambassador. And I love the idea of, I love koalas. I have so many on my farm. Unfortunately, one got killed last night. So I was very disappointed to hear that. I've turned into a bit of a hippie. I plant trees everywhere now, so I like the idea of the trees, and I think that it's a really good project that is good for Liverpool Plains. I'm also involved in Pain Australia, so I'm an ambassador for Pain Australia. Because of my injuries, I suffer with a lot of pain, and for me, that will never go away. I'll probably have that for the rest of my life, and in different degrees of, because just the injuries affect other parts of my body, just part of walking and doing the things that I do. So I really enjoy speaking on behalf of Pain Australia. I like being involved with them, and the defence sports sell stuff. So I work within that, again, for Brigadier Winter. But I really think that sport is the way for veterans to continue to excel and to be, to feel worthy of themselves, to just feel healthy. So I like being involved in that. I love seeing the success stories that come out of that. And again, I love the way that defence sees value in me being in that side of things. So I'll continue on. Red 6, which is an app set up by an ex-veteran to help guys and girls with mental health. And it's a nice, simple app. People can get on there if they're struggling. They can let others know. It triggers certain things to occur so they can get assistance. So I'm very lucky to be involved with some organisations that have really good people in them and that are set up around helping people. So I'll probably continue on this line as long as people find it interesting to have me involved, and as long as I can be productive. And I'll continue to do the counselling. So I will add that even though it's a counselling business, I get my pension and all that sort of stuff through Defence. I don't charge people to counsel them. I'm more about trying to keep people healthy than getting their money. I don't need their money. So the focus is trying to find a way for ahead for each one of those people. And where I get my validation out of that is hopefully they do better.
Indeed, mate. And Pete, if people want to get in touch with you, or if they want to, touch base around your counselling services, how can they reach out?
Best one is probably through email. We'll use peter.rudland, so Rudland, R-U-D-L-A-N-D, peter.rudland at rsl.org.au.
Pete, it's been an absolute pleasure on my behalf having you up here today to talk about, your career and what you've done for the nation, and now what you're doing for the veteran community and the broader emergency services community. So personal thanks for me, mate, and really appreciate everything you've done and everything you're continuing to do, particularly with the Royal Commission, which is a pivotal time for veterans, past, present and future. So thank you, mate. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here. And one thing I'd like to end on, though, just for the veteran space out there, one of the simplest ways to help our friends is by calling them. So, reach out, touch your friends every now and again, just a phone call, even a text. G'day, mate, how you doing? It gives people value and lets them know that someone's thinking of them. So very little tiny things can become big things that look after our people. Because if we don't look after our people, nobody else will.
Well said. Thanks, Pete. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.